afternoon, and welcome to our monthly Dalim Tips and Tricks webinar. My name is Alex, and today we'll be discussing ES parameter sets, or ES process parameters. If you're new to our GoToWebinar series, I think the screenshot here is a little out of date now, but somewhere in the top of the main GoToWebinar window, there should be a zoom button you can use to adjust the scaling if my screen appears too large or too small for you. In the control panel, there should be a questions area where you can type any questions you might have during the presentation. Typically, we wait till the end to do a full Q&A, but if there's a question that's particularly pertinent that pops up, I may pause to address it. As mentioned, this is part of our monthly Dalim Tips and Tricks webinar series. We typically do one webinar the third Wednesday of each month. As soon as we know what we're going to be doing, we'll put the webinar up on our site, and we've also been putting them up on our Zendesk portal too, so that you have registration links there as well now. I've been trying to put the recordings up there too, so if you're looking for recordings of a past webinar, they should be on our Zendesk now too, at least for most of this year. As mentioned, we'll be talking about process parameters. This will be a short one, but I think it's a good topic to cover because it's something that comes up. I don't think people have had too much familiarity with these days. We'll talk about how you can use process parameters to control ES or twist workflow settings. I'll give an overview of some of the common pre-baked process parameters that Dalim includes with ES. I'll talk about how you can create your own custom parameter templates, and we'll talk a little about best practices about when it's best, how to choose between job tickets and metadata and process parameters. As far as assumptions, I'm going to assume that even if you haven't done too much with metadata and job tickets, you're at least familiar with the just basic broad strokes of how they work. A lot of this is really going to be comparisons to how process parameters work versus metadata. So I'm assuming at least a little knowledge there. But as far as it goes, what are process parameters? They are a broad scoped way of storing some kind of system-wide or widely used settings that can be then used to control the functions of ES tools. They can be stored in parameter sets, which are just groupings of parameters that can be assigned either via project template, by file, by individual files, or by individual tools themselves. There are, I think, where some of the confusion with these, if you've ever looked in the parameter set area in ES, is that there are two kinds. There's the original kind of intention, which is that they're passed as variables to it. They can be passed as variables to a tool, just like metadata, where you can take a process parameter and give that as the to a digital delivery step to tell it where to output files. And there are also, I think, as the years have gone on, we've had more of what I'd call hard-coded process parameters. There are certain settings that Dalim really didn't have another place to put that got shoved into process parameters out of necessity. As an example would be some of the preview generation settings for thumbnail size or thumbnail rendering engine. Some of those, they're not something you can really use in a tool, but some tools like preview generation are hard-coded to look at the process parameters for those settings, and there's no other place you can set them. And I think that causes some of the confusion with these. So my hope is I'm going to go over a few of those hard-coded ones just so you know what's in there. Most of this is going to focus on the traditional kind of variable process parameters and how you can set up your own custom ones. And these really do, for the most part, behave like metadata, where you're just collecting a value that you can use in a tool somewhere, which raises the question of what's the difference? Why would you use these when you have job tickets and metadata? I thought about it a bit, and I think there's really three cases. These do have a very limited use, I would say, in current ES systems, but they do have a definite use in cases where you're dealing with some kind of system-wide data. So maybe, for example, you've got some global setting that's applicable to every job on the system, or if not every job, a large number of jobs spanning multiple different customers. You could also have, for example, environment-specific settings where maybe you want to differentiate something based on whether you're running on your live production or whether you're on your dev server. You might want to disable some transmits, for example. I think those are really the cases where these are most beneficial. So what we'll do here is we'll start with the default parameter set here. These are under the Workflows tab in Administration. This is going to look a little different from what you see in your system. I built a custom job ticket to make the display a little more pretty. Everything with the exception of my webinar example down here is all stock parameters that ship with ES. I will show you how to make these later, but I thought it was a little easier to show the completed job ticket now just for understanding purposes rather than just the raw dump of parameters that Dalim gives you by default. But you can see in here that you have just different tools for settings. We've got a few of the hard-coded ones here, like whether or not you want to use deep learning analysis on files when they come in, whether you want to do text extraction. You've also got some for an example for some of the stock workflows that ship with ES, control over what twist workflow they might use via ES Connect, what pre-flight profile they might use via ES Connect, and where the files can be delivered. And I think these are really where these started was, and it still is the case today, if you have a basic ES license and you don't have the workflow editing license, then you're basically stuck with these default workflows that Dalim ships with ES. So Wiffle Preview, Wiffle Transmit, Wiffle Dialog. And if I look at one of these, for example, because if you don't have workflow editing, you can't go into these workflows to tweak where they're delivered when the files are done, or to tweak which twist workflow files might be being sent to. I think that's really the genesis of where this came from. And if you look at Wiffle Dialog,
I was say all that's a throwback a bit to ES2, the original connections from ES to Twist. Go ahead.
Yep, this is some of this is pretty retro. There are still a few people out there, I think, who run ES with a basic license without any workflow editing, but it's fairly rare these days. You still do see kind of the skeletal relevant, the skeletal. Well, I can't speak. Just the basic remnants of it, though, left over from that period in some of these early workflows. So, for example, Wiffle Dialog, and this is one that I think has bitten a few people because they weren't aware of it. I know I've stuffed a few drives with this myself. Wiffle Dialog is the stock workflow that comes with ES that all new projects use by default until configured. So files would come in, they go to AutoLink to place them on the flat plan if it exists. Preview generation to generate a thumbnail. The approval step where it waits for approval, and then depending on whether it's approved or rejected, it goes to one of these two digital deliveries here. And if you look at these, they're set to use, rather than where you might set metadata in here or just hard code an output channel, these are set to look at a parameter set. It's done the same way you would with metadata or a variable, but you're telling it what parameter set to look at, and then you're telling it which parameter within that set to use. And in this particular case, it's using the onApproval destination parameter. There is also an option in here where you could set a specific parameter set to use. If you don't set anything here, then it'll just go with whatever the default is for that project template or for that individual file if it has its own custom parameter set linked with it. But here you can see it's using onApproval destination from whatever my default parameter set is for my job. If I go to the default here, you'll see that onApproval destination is just a output channel selector. So I can choose either onApproved or onRejected. I can choose any output channel in my system. And as Fred mentioned back in the ES2 days, if you're using a basic non-workflow editing license, this is how you would choose where your file is transmitted. And you'll see that if those are output channels, if I go up here, I've got my onApproved and onRejected, and they go to this Symlinks data ES final, and then a few folders for year, customer name, job name, and whether the file was approved or rejected. And then you can tweak that path if you need to later on. Let's upload a file here. And I have this path up on my server. I'm just SFTP'd in. Okay, now once I approve this, I have to wait a second for it to show up. Let's see here. Oh, I'm using the wrong workflow here. My mistake. That's what's wrong. Sorry, forgive me here. Let's do this over again. So I'll pop my file in here. We'll use the correct workflow this time. So our file just came in. I'll approve it. And you'll see that now we have a folder in here for my customer under 2020 and approved, and my file showed up there. This one still tends to bite people because Wiffle Dialog is the standard test workflow, and a lot of people still use it in production, even if they're not relying on those those outputs in here. So I've gotten a few tickets over the years where it's like, why is my ES using all this space in Symlinks Data ES Final? And this is the reason why. And I've done that myself on my system a few times. So, for example, if you wanted to avoid that on your system, you can always go in and just disable that output channel so that it doesn't actually transmit to that path. In our case, just to show you how the parameters work, I did create a second parameter set in here called different approval transmit. And just so we get some difference in here, this thing has a different output channel selected for the on approval destination. And also, just so we have a little more difference in here, I changed the preview resolution from 144 dpi down to 20, just so you can see how these control those settings. So what that preview resolution is controlling is, as I hit spacebar right now, you can see that it brings up, ES brings up a preview of my file. After I reprocess this in the other parameter set, I'm going to right-click here, hit Properties. I'm going to do Process Parameters here, and I'm going to change that to Different Approval Transmit. Now, I'm going to reprocess this, and we should see two things happen after I process this. First is that our preview should be pretty blurry because we changed that down to 20 dpi. And then once I approve it, it's going to transmit to, yep, there we go. Just to show you that that setting does change something. And then if I approve this, it's going to transmit to my other output channel on approval. And I just made that in the same kind of path, but with a slightly different structure. Yep, there we go. Alternate from other param. I'll delete that was from the other example I ran too soon. So that's about the basics of how that works. That preview generation thing I did with the thumbnail, that's one of those hard-coded params I was talking about earlier. There's no setting in the preview generation tool itself to actually tweak the resolution or the rendering configuration of the thumbnails that generates. The only place you can do that is in the process parameters itself, but it's different from this where you're just setting a variable basically. So before we go on with building custom parameters, I'll just explain real quick what a few of those other kind of hard-coded parameters do that ship with ES. You've got the archive or store ones if you're using Archware, you can control which plan Archware uses. You've got text extraction controls, whether or not ES will extract the text from files and use that to and index that for search. If you have that enabled, every PDF that comes into a job using that parameter set will extract all the text to make it searchable. That might be good if you want that text searchable. It might be bad if you're getting too many false positives from common words in PDFs. So you've also got the remove multi-page on split, which is for if you're using PDF split. What that'll do is once PDF split completes and separates a multi-page PDF into singles, if that's checked, that will delete all the that'll delete the original multi-page PDF and leave only the split pages. And you've got preview use deep learning, preview color extraction, which are These are used for the similarity search over here on the search screen, where if, for example, you want to do a search by colors, you can see I have the color bars here, which shows me what's in that PDF, and I can search based on color composition to find similar documents. Where it's looking at what colors make up that image. And then the similarity, which goes based off just similarities in the contents of the image, like whether it's a portrait or whatnot. Those have to be enabled in the process parameter. The similarity in particular is one to watch out for. That generates some really kind of nasty metadata in Elasticsearch. I think I have that enabled in my system, where if you're doing that similarity search where you're looking for to find other images, it tends to put in this metadata where you've got all these large strings of numbers, which they mean something to the similarity engine, but they are miserable if you're trying to search for numbers. You get a lot of false positives. So if I search for, I'll just pick some random numbers here. I'll just pick one here. If I search for something like I'm looking for a file that has 642 in the name, I might wind up accidentally getting false positives from this similarity metadata. We've had a few tickets on that recently, so that's one case where you might want to make a separate process parameter for files that use that. So you're only doing that similarity analysis on files that need it, so it's not contributing to false positives elsewhere on the system. You've got the standard, I don't have a really wiffle dialog, I just named my section header here that, but the standard things for the old ES2 kind of workflows where you can control what workflow and pre-flight profile ES-Connect would use, the paths we just went over. You've got for preview generation, you can control how many like interstitial thumbnails it generates, what ICC profile is using for it, what size and resolution they are, whether it's done with Dalim's engine or Adobe's, and just general things like that. Preview generation and transcoding. This is another one where it's hard-coded. You can't choose if you're doing a video transcode with the video transcode tool in a workflow. You can't choose what format you're using in that tool. It has to be done directly in here for whatever reason. Some of the 3D conversion stuff, and then a few just different settings for imposition and CFF to imposition template use. Those are most of the stock ones, but where this really I think would be useful is if you're trying to build your own settings. And you can do that under IO, or not IO, customization, and parameter template. And this works like you think it would for a metadata set and a metadata. You don't have metadata sets here really. Parameters are all or nothing, but you have properties like you would in a metadata set. You can say maybe your property is, maybe I've got an enumeration, for example, which would be a drop-down list for PDF type. And you're telling Twist what you want it to output. And that could be maybe either you've got what, X1A or X4. And typically you want to put some kind of value in here as a default so it knows what to choose. And whenever you create a new parameter set, it's going to pull that default and use that as the starting point. So if you are creating multiple parameter sets, it's good to have some kind of default in there because for some of these you're not going to be tweaking every single setting. It's good to have a default for it to fall back on so they're easier to configure. But I made two in here as an example, 2 or 3 in here as an example. If I shuffle back to my set. Let me know if I'm moving too fast between these. I'm trying to show you the configuration thing. I probably should have opened 2 browser windows, but so I made a few settings here for an example workflow for our webinar. We're going to change 3 different things here. PDF type will be either X1A or X4. Delivery path, we have 2 different printers, which I made output channels for Mr. Print and Litho King, but it really could be any output channel. And I made a checkbox for whether or not we want to trap these files. So what I did here is I made 2 parameter sets for these. One for, maybe we've got, we're working for some publisher and they've got 2 offices that handle different titles. One's in Chicago, one's in Metairie, Louisiana. And the Chicago one is doing X1A output. They're printing with Mr. Print. They want to trap. Metairie doesn't. You could configure this with their project templates so that they each get the appropriate settings. So if I go into Demo Corp, they have the Demo Corp template. They have the parameter set configured in here. So you can see I'm using the Chicago settings. For my New Orleans widget company, they're using the Metairie parameter set. And how this is going to work is I built a workflow here that just a simple workflow. Files come in, generates a preview, it normalizes them in Twist. We have a simple approval cycle for just pre-press approval here. And once it's done, we're delivering to both press delivery and a digital edition delivery for some vendor to generate digital edition files. I cheated a little here. I just made a metadata tweak in here. So for my output channel, I'm changing the folder that it delivers into to say either high res or DE for digital edition. Might be a little lazy for production, but it works for purposes of what I wanted to show here. And what this is going to do in here is my workflow in Twist, which I will open real quick. Pretty straightforward. Things come in. I have two PPDs in here, two variables that I'm letting ES feed into Twist. The first is trap file. Either I want to trap my file or I don't. And the second is PDF type. What type of PDF do I want my OPDF tool to output here? So what I did here is I fed my two tools in as variables here for Twist. You can see I have my parameter set. And I'm saying I want to use the webinar normalizer trap setting. I'm past that as this trap file test variable in Twist. I also have a PDF type variable for Twist. I'm using my PDF type parameter here. And for both of them, I'm using just the default parameter. And for the outputs here, I'm using just the webinar normalizer delivery path parameter for both of those. And I'm letting those program links control the specific subfolder the files drop into. On the Twist side, once I get that PPD in here, I'm just setting OPDF to use whichever format I had set in my parameter set. And for the trapping here, I'm deciding that if trap files is true, it goes down here to power trap. If not, it bypasses that and goes straight to OPDF. So if we go to Demo Corp up here, I will upload, make sure to delete this one, and I'll upload as file. And let me see if I can catch this thing in Twist real quick. Yep, you can see that that went through trapping because trapping was enabled for this. And if I approve this, it's going to go ahead and transmit to my final delivery path here. I got both my DE and my high res. And actually open that. We'll see that we got the X1A. If I were to use the other parameter set here, and I'll dump another file in here, maybe this one. If that went in all right. Try refreshing real quick. was playing around with input rules, so I might have broken that one. But let's go back up here to Demo Corp. I can show you in here. If I take the same file, I'll actually just change the parameters in here. And I'll change that to use the Metadata settings. And now if I reprocess, this time when it goes through, if I can grab that real quick, you'll see that it's skipped trapping. And if we download the file again this time, open this with Acrobat, we got an X4. So it does what it's advertised to do. But one thing I wanted to show is, let's say that, I'll go into my workflow here. Let's say that for whatever reason, regardless of whatever printer I have set, for this specific workflow, there's only one printer that does the digital edition. So regardless of whatever's set in my parameter set for my job, I want to send this to LithoKing or use whatever setting Metadata has. I could go in here and I could always just hard code the output path in here, but I can also say I wanted to use this specific parameter set for this particular transmit. So even if the deliver to press is going to follow my job setting, I wanted to use this other parameter set for this specific transmit. I can do that. So if I go back here, so change the workflow actually and delete this guy and re-upload. And I'll delete all my examples here just so we have a clean slate. Yep. And I'll upload our PDF here. So you can see that time it went through, it trapped because we had all the settings for Chicago. But if we look at the delivery, we'll see that I got to approve it before it delivers. That would help. You'll see that our high res went to Mr. Print, and our digital edition files went to LithoKing. So you've got a little flexibility there, at least, on how you set these up. Because even if you're using different process parameters for, if you're using only one set of process parameters for most things, you could have other parameter sets if you had common settings you used in, for like e-twist steps in a lot of different workflows. You could call that parameter set and then set those variables the same in multiple different workflows even. So now one thing I think I did when I screwed up my output channels is I was going to show you, you can also set these on input with an input rule. So for example, if maybe you know that a file has, you want to trap covers regardless of what happens, whatever's set in the job, you want covers to trap. You could, if you know that your cover starts with CV somewhere in the name, in the middle of the name, you can go in here and you can set the process parameters to use in the rule input rules that that's associated from the get-go when files are uploaded. So regardless of what the job has as its overall settings, if the file name matches this cover setting, then use these process parameters, which might specify a specific PDF format and trapping, which is different from the rest of the job. So just one other thing you could use these for. One example I'd thought of too that I don't think I'd recommend as it stands currently, but I was leaning towards as an interesting idea was because these really make sense only when you have something you need to change on a lot of jobs or you want centralized in one place as a setting for a lot of jobs. One thing that came to mind is API credentials. If you're using a script step in the middle of a document workflow, so if you throw to a script step to run some API command to generate a report or something, typically people are hard coding those credentials in scripts, or they're passing them as a parameter in the script step when it gets called in here. One thing I think might be useful is if you could actually build a process parameter or a parameter, like a parameter template, so that you have in here for system-wide. Oh, actually, I've got a parameter set here. Getting confused. It would be nice if you could have a setting in here for, you could put like your API username and your API password in here, and then you pass that as a parameter to all your script steps. And you can technically do that right now. The only catch is that these parameter templates, there's no option for the encrypted like you could get with metadata. Like if you go to metadata, there's an encrypted option that lets you put in something that doesn't show in the interface. It shows like the dots like you'd get for a password. I might put in, if that's something you'd be interested in using these for, if anyone's interested in that, I might put in an SEO to see if Dalim could develop that, or if they'd be interested in, because I think as far as overall settings that you want centralized so you could change them globally, API credentials seem like a good one. So if you're interested in that, let me know and I can put in an SER. But in general, I think these apply to those kind of settings where if it's something that you're dealing with on an individual project level frequently, then a project level metadata is the best place to put it. If it's something that you're tweaking on at like the page level during upload metadata or page metadata would probably be the best place for it. If it's something you're doing on the customer level, then customer metadata would be the best place for it. But if it's like these large scale overall settings that you're using on many different customers and many different jobs, usually relating to some kind of third-party consideration, like what office the job is being handled in or what printer's handling it. That's one case where I think these make sense. And the other case would be just global settings like API credentials or overall what output settings you might want to use. So I think that's pretty much the overall gist of these things. I will say real quick, as far as how I prettied this up, you can build these as job tickets here. So if you go in here and, I don't know, Fred, if that's you, could you mute real quick? I'm getting a lot of feedback here. Thank you. So you can build the job tickets in here just like you can for metadata. And in fact, if, let me go back here. I'm getting ahead of myself. If I go back here to workflows, let's say, actually, no, I got to go back here. I'm getting confused. I'm actually going to delete, I built 3 custom job ticket layouts for this webinar just to make it a little easier to view. In general, if you look at this on your system, try that one more time. Yep, second time's the charm. If you go in here, first off, without having built any custom tickets like I did on your system, what you'll probably get when you see process parameters is just this large parameter dump of all the settings loose, which does the trick, but it's not really an ideal way to work with these things. Then what you can do is you can build job tickets. And if you go in here, you click job ticket. You choose parameter set instead of metadata, and you can give it however many rows or whatever you want. I'll give it another name. I don't think the global setting does anything here. I tested because parameter sets by nature are global, so there's no way you could really load a different layout on a per job basis. But these work the same way as metadata, where you can go in and you can build a field set and drag in whatever fields you want. So one thing to be aware of, though, if you do experiment with this, is that as soon as you create one of these, it overrides the view in your parameter set. So if I go back here now and try to load one of these, I'll only see the 2 or 3 parameters I chose there. Where that winds up being a problem is I kept confusing myself when I was trying to set this up. Is let's say you make one and then you don't really put anything in it because you figure I'll come back to it later. And then if you go back to load your process parameter set, there's nothing in here. All those settings are still active using whatever they're configured as, whatever they were previously configured as. They're just not showing here until I add things. But that happens as soon as you create these sets. So generally you want to know what you're going to do beforehand and map it out and then create it. And then you should be able to see everything in here. That's a good way to hide if you're not really interested in a lot of those default values that it shows you. You can, like, if you're not doing anything with 3D files, for example, you can hide all those 3D parameters off the bat just by showing only the ones you want. And I think that's one way you can make that a little less cluttered and a little less intimidating. If anyone wants the ones I created for this webinar, I can give those to you via data layout. I'll re-import those. I just took all the default ones they had and tried to organize them a little logically. So if anyone wants, here we go. Yeah, so if anyone wants this sort of layout of them, all the parameters layout based on criteria, let me know, toss me a line, and I'll pass you the export of what I created here, just so these are a little less intimidating. But with that, I think I covered all the points. So does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, well, you just covered one of them, which was how did you make the ticket look as nice as it does? Because the default way is pretty ugly. So
Yeah.
Covered that.
Yeah.
Another question.
I kind of cheated on that because I didn't want to show that up front. I didn't want to show that up front because it was out of order with the rest of the stuff. But I wanted to show it with this because it's easier to interpret if you can at least see how these are structured. But you said there was another
question. Process parameters that toggle twist tool settings are quote unquote best used in conjunction with the PPD feature in twist. Not sure what the question is there.
I think they have to be used in conjunction with the PPD setting, regardless of what you're doing. If you're passing variables to either twist or eTwist, you have to have a PPD set to pass those variables into. This is basically twist saying it's looking for variables from whatever it's interacting with, whether that's WebLink or ES or Mistral back in the day. This is a twist way of saying here's the variables I'm looking for. From the workflow in here in ES, it doesn't matter what you use here. It could be a parameter set. You could also pull these from metadata if you wanted to pass from, like, if you had this set of the job level, the output type, then in that case, job level metadata would be the best way to set the PDF output type. If that was an overall system-wide setting for maybe you had dozens of customers that all used the same PDF output setting because they shared a common printer, then that's when a parameter set might be the better way to sort it. You can also, in the case of specific workflows, just hard code that as an expression or just as a hard-coded value here, like true or X1A. So that's not specific to process parameters, but it can be used in conjunction with them.
Great. Just let us know if that answered your question on that. Somebody's asking are you using ES55 for this or ES6?
I'm using ES55 right now.
The question is whether it's the same for both, and I believe it is, other than the job ticket's a lot easier to set up.
Yeah, I'll have to retest the job tickets on ES6, but it should be the same otherwise. I don't think these have really changed much since the ES2 era.
And we did get a thanks on the previous question, so you did answer that question. Right. And I was tied up a little bit, and there was another question which I think you may have covered, but I'm not sure, which is, can these be used in the program link?
That seems to be one of the downfalls of these right now. I was playing around with this I actually want to put a ticket to Dalim. If you go into the workflow here, and I'll just do a show context, it shows you the parameters that the file is using in this metadata tab here. So you can see all the parameters set here, including my output path. And if you click the I button here, it's supposed to show you how to reference those in metadata. But I was trying this, and this doesn't seem to work. Because this typically, like if you go to standard metadata, like page order metadata, it gives you a little piece of code you can paste in to get that in a program link and deal with it, or to use in the condition editor. But these don't. There doesn't seem to be a way currently to reference these in a program link or the condition editor. I did talk to Dalim about this. It looks like they opened a ticket to see if they can get that fixed, because I think that would be useful, in particular if you had like a production and a dev environment. You could set an overall parameter that says whether the system is production or dev, and then use that to route things around settings you don't want to run on dev, like settings that send emails or deliver files or talk with other production systems. I think that's one case where this would be useful. So hopefully we'll get a fix for that, and that will be possible in the future.
And that was it. So,
thank you for attending.
Thanks, Alex. I think that was a beneficial one to do and to get through and kind of get documented for everyone. A lot of people kind of set this up when they initially set up an ES, or we set that ES up for them, and kind of never look back at these settings. And it's nice to see how they can maybe be used to expand what you're doing, or to help you understand why some stuff happens the way it does.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think it's when if you're anything like me, as soon as you see this large list of parameters like this, you run screaming. So I think job tickets go a long way to helping with that, and hopefully this helped a little too.
Absolutely. All right. So thanks everybody for attending. As soon as we have the topic for next month's webinar, third week of November, we'll get that out to you. If you have any good ideas for a webinar we should do, please email text@branches.com. We'll be happy to consider that and try to cover it as soon as we can. So everyone have a great day.